Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
On this episode, real-life encounters with the unusual, the inexplicable, and the downright terrifying. The Shadowland radio show presents The World of Shadows. The following is a story related by a man who wanted to be known only as Steve. I was showing my friend around the swamp where I'd found a lot of cool minerals, including black quartz. This was at night. First, while we were walking down the muddy banks, suddenly I heard something faint somewhere above us. I told my friend to shut up and told him to listen. Then we looked up to see something big and dark swoop into a tree and hit something or get something. We heard a weird sound like a mouse mixed with a crocodile. Shrieky but low-pitched. He was about to offer to leave, as I found out later, when he suddenly told me to stop pushing him. I reminded him that I was in front of him, meaning that if I pushed him, I'd slip down the steep bank. Suddenly, I felt a shove on my left shoulder from a hand about 2.5 times as big as his. I almost fell before I grabbed a branch that my hand passed by. That's when my friend asked me where I was and said we should switch on my flashlight now. I did so, then got back to my feet. Again, I felt that big hand on my shoulder. This time, I thought it was my friend. I spun around, lost my footing for a second. I was awed by 2 huge red circles staring at me, so I shined the flashlight at it. My friend and I saw a huge black creature with metal-like claws covering its eyes from the flashlight. It had an odd human appearance to it, but with scales. It gave a shriek like the one we heard before my friend grabbed its arm. It spun around, flinging him about 2 feet back with one of its claws. It then swiftly ran forward, hopped onto a tree, and like nothing we'd ever seen before, it jumped from tree to tree. Later, we found out that its claw had actually left a scar about 2 to 3 inches. The next account, given to us by Lisa, relates a young woman's brush with supernatural forces. A few years ago, while lying in bed at night, I woke up and saw a girl, probably about 18 years old or so, standing in front of the door looking at me. She was somewhat startled that I saw her. Apparently she didn't expect me to see her. Folded her arms, she said, "Oh, I'm just here looking for something. Go back to sleep." I thought she was someone who came in from outside, but how could that be when all the doors and windows were locked? She was barefoot and wore a white short-sleeved gown that went down to her ankles and had snowflake patterns on the center area. She was standing in front of my bedroom door and was probably a few feet away from me. She looked real enough. When she told me to go back to sleep, I saw her lips move, but heard the voice in my head, if that makes any sense. She had pitch black hair in a ponytail fashion and very white skin. The pupils of her eyes had a strange orange-like color. She reminded me of someone I saw when I was 9 years old. I was 21 at the time of this encounter. But when I was 9, I saw a girl spinning around in front of me while I was sitting on the bed. While she was spinning, some gold dust came off of her, and it gave me a feeling of contentment and happiness. I wonder if this was the same person. I wonder who she is. Here's another fascinating incident in which ordinary people encounter unexplainable spirit forces. One day when I was a teen, I was walking home from school. The path that I took led me down a city sidewalk right next to my sister's house. She lived in a corner house with her basement door facing the sidewalk. As I approached the house, I noticed that the basement door was standing open. I did not think this was strange because it was an old house, and they had been making some repairs to it at the time. But just as I walked past the door, I heard a very profound sound. 3 loud bangs. They were evenly spaced. They were deep in tone. Each bang had a resonance of equal length. It did not sound like it was produced by a hammer. It seemed to shake the entire house. I remember thinking it was odd, but I was in a hurry to get home, so I just dismissed it as someone working in the basement, and I kept on walking. But just as I got past the house, my sister came running out of the house screaming. She had been on the first level of the house when the 3 bangs occurred. She said that the sound came from the second level of the house and that it engulfed the entire house. She said she was sure it came from a supernatural source. Prior to this, she had heard footsteps and other unexplained noises in the house. Also, her dog would often leap to his feet and run into the kitchen and begin barking at nothing, as if it were someone there. We believed the house had a spirit in it, and that the spirit had something to do with the 3 bangs. In another story, a girlfriend of mine once told me of 3 knocks she heard on the front door of her house. She lived in the house with her mother and father. The knocks occurred the night of her mother's death. Just after her mother had passed in the house, she heard 3 knocks on the front door. When she opened the door, there was no one there. What, if any, is the significance of the 3 knocks? I feel that it does signify something. Here is a scary encounter presented to us by an anonymous contributor. When I was about 9 or 10, when my parents were still together, we were living in a really old house. It was 2 stories and it had a basement. The house always creeped me out. I know this will sound strange or stupid, but I was sort of psychic when I lived there. I would have these strange dreams, and then the next day something from the dream would happen. But I also had many nightmares there. In one particularly frightening nightmare, I was standing in my own room. My room was sort of bathed in dark blue shadows, so it was hard to see. There was nothing in my room except for the curtains on my 3 windows. I kept saying, "Who are you? What do you want?" And then I heard these 2 little kids' voices whisper. I couldn't tell what they were saying at first, but the whispers became loud, as if the kids were excited about something. Then I could hear them talking. I think they said something like, "She will help us. She can hear us," and repeating that, but it was still in loud whispers. I was afraid my parents would wake up. My dreams are the feel real kind, like if I trip over something in my dream, I will jerk awake, or if the wind was blowing, I can really feel it. I said again, "Who are you? Where are you? Are you trapped?" And then it was like they sent me a vision, 2 little kids inside my wall whispering to each other. I became really scared when I saw this, and I woke up. Almost every time I'm dreaming, I actually know it and try to wake up. When I woke up, I was lying on my side, facing the wall where the kids were in my dream. I became wide awake with fear as I stared at the wall. I could still hear the kids whispering, only quieter. A gentleman named Kevin provides us with the next incredible story. I have a favorite aunt named Juvie and a favorite uncle named Mick who lived in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, in a very nice and quiet area. I used to love sleeping over to her house because they were both young at heart and loved me and my brother and sister very much. My aunt worked first shift, which was 7 a.m. until 3 p.m. My uncle worked second shift from 3 p.m. until 11 p.m. So every time I slept over, he would leave for work at 2:15 and I would wait for my aunt to get home around 3:30. One day I was upstairs playing Nintendo and I heard her two doors open and slam shut. The doors were very old and heavy, so we would always hear people come in and out of the house. I thought my aunt had come home early from work. I could hear her come up the stairs. After a little while of not hearing her call me, I left the TV room and walked to the top of the stairs. I yelled out, "Aunt Juvie, are you home?" No response. So I didn't think anything of it. About 3 months later, around 9:30 p.m., my phone rang and my dad answered it. It was my aunt. My dad said she was screaming and crying. She was watching TV upstairs and heard the doors open and footsteps going up the stairs, just like I did, and thought it was my uncle coming home from work early. She told my dad she called my uncle's work and he was still there. I told my dad that I heard the same thing one day when I was alone in the house. My aunt wanted to find out what was going on in that house because now she was getting harassed by that ghost every day. She would walk down the stairs and it would keep banging the wall right behind her head. She contacted the old owner of the house and found out that the now 27-year-old girl who lived there with her mother used to see this ghost every night in her bedroom. It would appear in the corner just staring at her. This was the guest room that I had always used to sleep in. Paranormal researchers are quite familiar with sightings of imposing hooded entities. What follows is a related account by Lucas J. of Atlanta, Georgia. This happened to me when I was about 12 years old. My family and I live in a very small house in Atlanta. I slept in the living room, and right next to my room was the laundry room where my older brother slept. The laundry room had a wooden floor, ceiling, and walls. The laundry room was very small, and about all it had room for was my brother's bed and a chair that he kept next to his bed. I slept on a bunk bed on the top bunk, and when I was lying in my bed, I could see inside of my brother's room. One night I woke up at about midnight. Everybody else in the house was asleep. I remember feeling very afraid the instant that I woke up. Mind you, I know that I was not asleep. I looked into my brother's room, and in the darkness I thought I saw somebody sitting in the chair by his bed. Surely this cannot be, I thought to myself. I tried to look at whatever this was as just a pile of clothes, like my mind was playing tricks on me. But no matter how I looked at it, all I could see was what looked like a person wearing a hood, like a cloak, staring at my brother. I kept staring at it, and I guess it knew I was looking at it because it turned to look at me. I could not see any facial features, just evil darkness. I promptly laid back down in my bed. I was petrified. Cold sweat dripped from my pores, and I trembled uncontrollably. Then I heard a sound, the sound of a chair scooting back across the wooden floor. Damn it, I thought as I heard footsteps coming toward me. My room had carpet in it, by the way. I heard footsteps on a wooden floor, then heard them on a carpeted floor, my floor. I pulled the covers over my head. I could feel this thing standing right next to me. I got very, very cold. I was horrified. When I finally mustered the nerve to sit up and confront the thing, it was morning. What has always bothered me is that I know this happened around 12 or 1 a.m. And when I sat up, the sun was out. I know that I wasn't dreaming. What happened during those 5 or 6 hours? Elizabeth G. provides a great little account of a ghost encounter in the Scottish Highlands. About 10 years ago, a friend and I went to visit Duffus Castle in Morayshire, Scotland. It was a rather grey evening with a cool wind. The castle is situated on a mound rising out of flat land and is approached along a straight road. We parked the car at a car park near the way, just a gate in a fence. But when we got to the gate, we decided that it was too cold and that we'd visit another day. There was one other car in the car park, and we saw the occupants up on the mound. As we walked back to the car park, I saw a man in the middle distance walking toward us along the road. We got into the car, I was driving, and I looked in the rear mirror before starting the engine. I saw that the man was almost at the entrance to the car park and said to my friend, "I'll just wait till this chap goes past." The man wore the clothes of a farm laborer with green Wellingtons. I waited for him to come into my peripheral view. Nothing happened. I looked around and he had disappeared. What is odd about this is there was nowhere for him to disappear to. There were no buildings or bushes or solid fences within several hundred yards, apart from the castle on the mound above. I have subsequently seen an aerial photograph of the site, and this confirms my recollection that there was no cover at all. My friend also saw the man as we walked to the car. He looked very un-ghost-like. Could it be a simple case of a rent in time and space? In other words, he was somewhere else at the time. Phil H. contributed this remarkable account of his brush with otherworldly forces. I was living with a girlfriend in southern Ontario, Canada back in 1987 and lived there until 1991. We had been asked to accompany some of my work acquaintances for a dinner out on New Year's Eve, 1990. After shaving, showering, and generally preening, I was looking in the mirror, straightening my tie, and stared at my reflection in disbelief. My girlfriend also saw what I did. Strange marks had appeared on my forehead in the pattern of a circle, and long, deeper marks I can only describe as indents. It was as if my forehead was made of plasticine and somebody had taken a pen cap or nail and scratched something onto my skin. The circle was almost dead center on my head, and what seemed to be dots or very small letters or numbers inside. This circle has only appeared rarely. The longer scars or scratch-like indents appear still to this day and at random, and I can be anywhere or doing anything. Strangely enough, few people have noticed when they appear, and often when I point this out to those I am close to, they almost instantly vanish. But I do have witnesses. I have tried photographing this phenomena to no avail. It never turns out clearly enough, but I'll keep trying. I don't really feel any different when this occurs, but it does give me the spooks at times. I wish I knew what was really happening and why it happens. Perhaps it is some connection with the occult-type dabblers that have passed through my life, that I unwillingly attracted myself, being an artist of sorts. I'm not against anyone interested in the occult, but I feel that perhaps someone is or has taken an offense or disliking to me for some reason. Could it be a spiritual attempt at contacting me somehow? Casey A. went public with this story in an attempt to cope with the lasting impact that this unexplainable event has had on her. This happened to me when I was 17 in southern Missouri, near the small town of Forsyth. My cousin and I were staying the weekend at a cabin that our family owns in the Mark Twain National Forest. It was about 10:30 at night, and we were just sitting in the back room playing PlayStation and talking. Suddenly, my cousin sat up with a frightened look on his face and turned around and looked out the window behind us. I asked him what was wrong, and he said something was looking at us from outside the window. Normally, I would have laughed it off because of his past history of playing pranks and goofing around, but his face was as pale as a corpse. Alarmed, I asked him what it looked like. He said he saw it only for a second and didn't get a good look, but it wasn't human looking at all. He said that when the TV screen went black to load the next stage of the video game, he could see the reflection of the window on the screen. A few moments later, my dog, a large Rottweiler, began barking and growling in the front room. We ran out there and he was frozen solid, staring at the door, growling. I was scared by this time. We stood and stared at the door for a few minutes and nothing happened. I went to the bedroom and grabbed my .22 rifle I brought along. I walked over and slowly opened the front door and told my dog to get him. Normally this dog would have rushed outside and raised hell with whatever was out there, but he just stood there whimpering and cowering by me. He would not get within 5 feet of the door. After about 5 minutes of trying to get my dog to go out, we heard something on the roof. It sounded like something ran from the back of the house to the front. I was scared to death, but curious. We worked up enough courage to walk out onto the front deck. The front deck has a large overhang and sits about 5 feet off the ground. We stood on the deck for a few moments. We saw something from the corner of our eyes drop from the roof to the ground and heard it go under the porch. I said something along the lines of, "Is someone there? I have a gun. You better leave us alone." Then I heard the most frightening sound I've ever heard in my life. Whatever it was under the porch let out a high-pitched scream that lasted only a few seconds. We quickly ran back inside. We continued to hear whatever the thing was outside scurry around outside the cabin. None of the windows in the cabin had blinds or curtains, which made me feel twice as uneasy. We stayed in the cabin the rest of the night with the lights on, sitting in a corner away from the windows with the gun fully loaded and ready to fire on this thing if it decided it wanted to come inside. We heard a lot of scratching sounds coming from the back door and sounded like the doorknob was trying to turn. We heard more scratching coming from the back room where we were earlier. Finally, the noises stopped, and we heard nothing for about 4 hours. We continued to wait until the sun came up. It had been daylight for about 2 hours. We went outside and looked around the cabin. On the back door there were deep scratch marks, and also on the window of the back room there were deep scratch marks on the window pane. We could not find any footprints because it was fall and there were leaves all over the ground. We packed up our stuff and left in a hurry. Later I asked my cousin to describe what he had seen in the window. He said that he didn't get a good look, but it was a tannish brown color with beady black eyes, no hair, and sharp teeth. He said that it was grinning at him when he saw it. He said about as soon as he turned around and looked, it quickly ducked down. This is something that is burned into my mind for the rest of my life. Just recalling all this has given me that same feeling of terror I had years ago. Until now, I've never shared this story with anyone, not even my family. My cousin and I haven't spoken of it since that day. I figured I would share it here because everyone here has had similar experiences and would not call me insane. And that concludes another edition of the Shadowland radio show. Thank you for listening to the program. I want to remind you that the show can be heard on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. It can also be heard on the Blackwater Media Facebook page, Pinterest, and Google+. When you go to the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Dr. William Lester reminding you that I will see each and every one of you again on the flip side.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
Good evening. I'm your host, Dr. William Lester. The Shadowland radio show is proud to present The World of Shadows, Chapter 2. I share my story with others who will not criticize me or claim that I'm a liar. I'm not much of a storyteller either, so I assure you that this story is 100% absolutely true. It all began when my 13-year-old daughter Lily and I went to New Jersey in the summer of 2013. We were visiting my sister Judith and her new husband for the summer. Their house isn't like those old creepy houses with cobwebs hanging in the doorway. It's a beautiful 2-story house that was built just the year before. I suspected nothing would ever go wrong until I met my sister's husband, Ryan's cousin, who was staying with them until he got over his major cocaine addiction. I never let my daughter go near him or stray out of my sight. Lily is a bright, beautiful, and charming young girl, but her fatal flaw is that she's always too trusting of the people around her. As a mom, that adds to my list of reasons that I'm so protective over her. The summer was starting out great. The house had a large pool that was wonderful because it was indoors. The house formed a sort of courtyard around the pool, and it was where we lounged on chairs and enjoyed the summer. It was about 2 weeks later when Lily was swimming in the pool. It was just us there, and I was sitting at the edge of the pool when I saw Ryan's cousin staring down at Lily from one of the windows. I was literally freaking the hell out. I grabbed Lily and wrapped a towel quickly around her. My motherly instincts kept telling me something was wrong about that man, and I'll never forget the way he looked at my daughter. In the weeks to come, bad things began to occur. Lily wasn't the same at all. She would mumble nonsense words and didn't like to go out of the room either. One night, I decided to go see her. I opened her room door and she was gone. It was late and I frantically searched the house for her. When I passed Greg's, Ryan's cousin's room, I heard Lily's voice from inside. I slowly turned the knob and saw the scariest thing in my entire life. Lily was lying on the floor in only her underclothes, and Greg was reading from an old leather book in a language I've never heard before. Just as I opened my mouth to yell bloody murder, a dark mass collected and hovered over, growing larger with each second. I bolted towards Lily, swooped her up in my arms, and ran out to my car as fast as I possibly could. As I was putting a blanket over her, I heard her whispering, "Book of Demons," over and over again. As long as Greg is still there, I refuse to visit Judith at that house. Days later, I had Lily blessed by a priest, and since then, not once did she ever mutter those words, "Book of Demons." All my life I've had tiny snippets, almost 2-second slideshows of dreams that have become reality. Some almost a decade later. I've become accustomed to this. It wasn't until I was 19 that I learned I could also see and interact with others. my first experience is still the scariest. I was sleeping in my bedroom, a long week of studying for finals in my freshman year behind me. I woke up, the thought, he's going to touch me. Oh my God, he's going to hurt me, screaming through my mind. I was groggy and confused. I looked towards my door, seeing only the barest of outlines, a rather large male. I thought I was just having a nightmare. I closed my eyes, trying to convince myself it was nothing more than my overactive imagination. My eyes popped open just as this face of an older man, late 40s, came close, his features contorted into a snarl. The outside of my right thigh, I was lying on my left side, began to spasm as intense pain speared through me. I passed out from the pain. I woke the next morning to find a huge bruise in the form of a handprint on the outside of my right thigh. It took more than a month to heal. The next night I was terrified to sleep, sitting up in my bed reading. I heard footsteps just outside my window. I got out of bed, looked out the window, thinking that perhaps a deer was walking through our yard. After all, we did live in a heavily wooded area. I saw nothing. The steps would start up and retreat. I'm not sure at what point I fell asleep. During my dream, I saw a young Native American male in World War II style clothing. In my dream, he told me his name was James, that he was my self-appointed guardian. He also told me to call upon him for protection and to do it quickly. I woke up mumbling and begging for his help. Since that original contact, I have called on James many times and have found that he does help me when needed. Answers my questions in typical spirit fashion, but is always correct. I've also been free of pain from the spirits that have tried to barge in and harm myself and my family. I had my first paranormal experience at the house I grew up in. I was not very old, about 4. I remember it like it was yesterday and so vivid. I often walk by the house just to reminisce. I remember that I was outside in the front garden. I had not been long outside when I looked beyond our garden fence, which had a grass bank, which was where I spotted what looked like a black hole, midair, seconds after noticing that the vivid and solid yet dark entity manifested. I could not believe what I was seeing. In broad daylight. The entity then began to move toward me. I watched it as it smoothly floated. It did not appear as if it was walking, just gliding, and stopped. And there it was, floating above our garden fence. It's quite obvious that this entity once walked on grounds which no longer exist. It makes my mind run wild thinking about what it would have looked like. As for the black hole in midair, I'd like to think it was some sort of portal. This solid figure was also really rather menacing, especially for a 4-year-old. It wore a black robe. The robe had long bell sleeves and it draped over its feet. His hands and feet were covered by it, also by a hood. The hood darkened its face. This paranormal being was so vivid that I even noticed the robe was torn at the bottom where it draped around its feet, and it even looked torn at the ends of the sleeves. Now that I'm older, to me this apparition reminds me of a monk. Only monks wear brown robes, don't they? I cannot help but that this spirit was evil, or even satanic. Maybe a group of Satanists gathered there. I would just love to know who and what it was, what it did, and why his robe was so black. After I ran away from it, because I was so frightened, after a few minutes I returned to the front garden and it was no longer there. I always wondered if it would appear there again, but it never did. Not in my presence anyway. I do believe the spirit I saw fits in with a few other things, a few other stories, which are connected to that house. The house was haunted by several astral beings, though. That was not the only apparition my mother and I experienced there. She did not witness this specific apparition, though. It has been a source of complete terror for me all these years. My name is Katharina. I work in a grocery shop in Louisiana. The experience which I am going to share is true and horrid. I usually do night shift to earn extra money. Last month, I was about to close the shop when a man in a black suit came and asked for a bottle of soft drink. I was very tired and was sleepy too, so before noticing his face or something, I handed him the bottle, and he paid and went away. I closed the shop and hurried home. On my way, I saw that same man following, but this time, he was all skinny, as if he had taken off his old clothes and was walking straight towards me. I was really scared. I wanted to scream, but it was as if I was mummed. I stepped quickly, short of running, towards my home and suddenly saw the man was flying. It was terrible, a horrifying scene. I prayed to God to give me death instead. I was so terrified and scared I began to shake. I was drenched in sweat and the man began to nod and laugh, an evil laugh. I ran. By hook or by crook, I reached home that night. It was so painful for me, not a single moment I slept. I just remembered the face of that evil creature. The next day I again went to the shop and the same thing happened. I didn't tell this to anyone as no one would believe me. For the last month, the same thing is happening again and again. It follows me home and then disappears. I'm a strong believer in God, so why is this happening to me? Please, I'm out of my mind. It's ruining my life. I can't take it anymore. Sometimes I think about suicide, but then I think of my family depending on me. Please, somebody out there help me. Please show me a way to get rid of this. I can't live my life this way. I am only 22. I'm supposed to enjoy my life. This thing has totally ruined me. It has become hell. Someone, please help me. When my son was 2, he started to talk about spirits. He would tell me they were in his room and they wanted to play with him. Once when he was 3, he was playing on the floor with his cards when all of a sudden he jumped to his feet and looked at me and asked, "Who's that, Mommy? Who's that little boy?" I peeked around the corner to where he was pointing and didn't see anything, so I asked him, "What little boy?" "There is no one there." He started to cry and kept saying to me, "Help him, Mommy, he's lost. Help him. He can't find his Mommy." I didn't know what to do. He continued to talk about ghosts, and I thought maybe he was just playing around. But at 2 and 3 years old, I don't know if he could make something up like that. Anyway, we moved to a basement apartment, and right from the first day, he talked of a little girl and something dark with red eyes. He was afraid to be alone in a room. One night, my cousin and I cleaned his room and I put him to bed. About 2 hours later, he woke up screaming in terror. I ran in and tried to calm him. He just kept saying, "Don't let the big black thing with red eyes get me. Don't let him get me." I swore I heard a growling sound through his scream, so I asked him to be quiet for a minute. He did. That's when I heard a very loud growling sound. It sounded like it was right by my head, and it was so loud I had to plug my ears. It was way too loud to be an animal. When I stopped, I screamed for my cousin to come in. She did, and I told her to sit on the chair at the end of the bed and just listen for a minute. After about 3 or 4 minutes, we heard it again, and it was so loud it felt like the room shook. My cousin was so scared, she jumped from the chair to the bed, and we all huddled there, scared to death. We moved the next day and never went back. Though we never heard it again, my son still talks about spirits. I feel bad because I told him it scares me, so he stopped telling me. He is 9 now, and I haven't heard him say anything since he was 5. But the other day he walked up to someone and said, You see them too." The guy smiled, nodded, and walked away. What is going on with my son, and how do I deal with this? It scares the hell out of me. I'm a firm believer in all of this, having been brought up around the spirits. What I'm about to tell you happened to me about 4 years ago. I was staying in Botswana with my dad and stepmom. When I used to go to bed at night, I would lay in bed and watch TV and often felt like someone was sitting on the end of the bed. You could see the indentation on the mattress, and it used to freak me out. On this one particular night, I went to bed as normal and all seemed to be okay. It was around 12 or just after when I woke up to go to the bathroom. As I got up, I felt something grab my thighs on the inside and hold my legs open. I started to scream, and the cat was in the corner hissing, and his hair was standing up. I couldn't see anyone on top of me, not sure how long it lasted, but I remember I still stood up, switched the light on, went to the bathroom, and thought to myself, did that just happen? In the morning, you could see bruises on my thigh, and I asked my father, "Did you not hear me shouting last night?" Our rooms were right next door to each other. He said he heard a soft noise, but didn't think anything of it. I don't know what happened to me that night, or what it was, but I do know it was real, and it felt like I was going to be raped with the way my thighs were grabbed and held down. I'm terribly afraid that this dark thing will return one night and attack me again. When I was around 10 years old, I had some friends over for a birthday sleepover. It was around 3 in the morning, and we got hungry, so we went to my kitchen and began to make sandwiches. When I looked outside of my sliding glass door, I saw something on my porch, silhouetted in the darkness. I turned on the porch light and had the life scared out of me. There was a huge thing on my porch. It was a man-sized dog-looking thing with these glowing reddish-yellow eyes, huge fangs, and its body was pink and hairless. It dashed off into my field at the sight of me, and I swore I saw it turn into a human and keep running. My friend saw it, but not the part where it turned into a man. Okay, fast forward about 7 years, April 20th, 2014. It was 2 a.m. and I had a few friends over, and I heard something on my porch yet again. I looked out of the window and couldn't see anything. I looked at my friends, shrugged, then looked back out the window. A face appeared out of nowhere, and I fell back in shock. I looked back out of the window to see the person running away, but he turned into something with a tail and 4 legs and kept running down my driveway. Nobody else saw him transform this time either. Then just a few nights ago, I saw it again. I was downstairs making a sandwich in the middle of the night, and I realized somebody was trying to open the sliding glass door from the outside. I turned on the porch light, and there it was. Something about 6 feet tall, with the head, arms, and legs of a fox or a wolf, clutching a tall medicine staff. It was pawing at the outside of the door, near the handle, trying to get in. Its face was painted with what I came to learn were traditional Navajo symbols. I live near a reservation. And its entire body was covered. I fell over and then scrambled back upstairs, where I clutched a knife in my bed for the rest of the night. I think I'm being stalked by an ancient Anasazi witch, otherwise known as a skinwalker. I'm scared to sleep or look out my window at night, and I don't know what to do. And that concludes another edition of the Shadowland radio show. Thank you for listening to the program. I want to remind you that the show can be heard on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. It can also be heard on the Blackwater Media Facebook page, Pinterest, and Google+. When you go to the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Dr. William Lester reminding you that I will see each and every one of you again on the flip side. If you're enjoying the show, go on over to blackwatermedia.net and join the Swamp Hunter Society. Just click on the Become a Member tab on the menu, and for only $4.99 a month, you can have exclusive access to the finest paranormal, horror, and supernatural story narration content available anywhere. It's the ultimate digital audio exploration into mystery, magic, monsters, and myth. Become a Blackwater Media Swamp Hunter Society member today. And welcome to another edition of the Shadowland radio show. I am your host, Dr. William Lester, and I am coming to you as always from the great city of Atlanta. Tonight we're joined by a very special guest who is also a very good friend of mine, Mrs. Robin Bellamy. So let me tell you a little bit about Robin. She was born in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Now, to the learned of you out there and listeners of the Shadowland radio show, I bet you can guess what direction we're going to go in with the Point Pleasant reference. Robin has served as member of Toronto Ghosts and Hauntings Research Society and added paranormal research to her resume. Robin has served that organization as a director and its parent organization, Paranormal Studies and Investigations Canada, as a board member, director of cryptozoology, and chief financial officer. Since leaving those posts in 2012, she continues to consult with film, television, and other media writers. In addition to professional pursuits, Robin is the primary blogger for CFZ Canada. On the literary side, Robin has published Haunt Cuisine, which is an eclectic collection of recipes and attendant ghost stories from North America. She's also the author of Haunted Hospitality, which is the historical account of the ghosts of the Low Hotel in Point Pleasant. Robin is currently working on Xenoforensics, a guidebook for using forensic science and paranormal research. I have to find out about that. Hello, Robin.
Hello.
I am very glad to have you joining us on the Shadowland radio show.
I always love talking to you.
Well, thank you very much. We've had our talks. We've been on other shows and other formats at times in the past, and I always love having you on. Now, before we get into the real groovy gravy, Xenoforensics. Now, tell us about that, because that sounds kind of Star Trek-y.
It is kind of Star Trek-y, only not. It's kind of like nerdness for ghost hunters. Basically, it is using the things that you see on CSI to help prove or debunk paranormal events. For instance, one of the cases that I had was a woman who had a glass that would move across her counter. Mm-hmm. And we said, okay, we can't make sure that nobody's touching this unless we dust it for fingerprints.
All right.
And, it's really that simple. Do the science behind it. And this book tells you how to do that. There's instructions on how to make a simple DNA test.
Really?
It'll take an animal or human or whatever excrement,
okay,
and tell you if it's human or not, which is helpful in the Bigfoot hunt.
Of course.
It will, give you all kinds of things like, is it canine? Is it, whatever.
Right.
And you can build that at home with stuff from the dollar store for the most part.
Now, you mentioned the DNA, and this is a very interesting
thing here, because you hear a lot of talk about DNA with respect to Bigfoot. Hair samples, droppings, things of this nature that people have been trying for a long time to get hold of, to do some kind of verification, right, through the DNA.
Right.
Now, but here's my question, and now let me preface this by saying, my knowledge of genetic science is, almost in the negative zone. So, when you do a DNA analysis of what you think might be a real Bigfoot, since we know that nobody has an example of Bigfoot DNA already in the database, what would we compare it to, right? Because we have all these other animals kind of cataloged
Right.
in the database, a bear, what have you. If you
It's basically a diagnosis by exclusion.
Okay, so we can say what it isn't.
Right. And then you can get to a point with your home test where you can rule out enough things to make it worth the money to go to a real lab.
Okay.
So many people don't do the DNA because they think they've got to invest $300 for a test.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can do the basic stuff to see if it's, a donkey,
right,
for instance, then you don't have to waste your money. I certainly would not presume to be able to sequence anything or,
right,
to know. But it's important, I think, to not waste your time and your money on yet another coyote sample
right,
that you think is a chupacabra.
right.
Especially since chupacabras are not ever known to be on mainland North America.
Right.
But I do think that at some point you can narrow it down enough to say, okay, this is not something we know about.
So we could have DNA of something that is not in our zoological database.
Well, presumably it wouldn't be.
Right. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I wouldn't imagine that even at the universities.
Right.
Well, they don't have Bigfoot DNA in their database. Okay.
Yep.
So if we could establish that we have legitimate DNA from a non-human life form in North America that is not currently in our zoological database, then we have something.
Or even more importantly, we can show that it has human characteristics but doesn't match any other known human sample.
Okay. I wonder what the reactions would be if that ever happens, because I had always assumed that with all of these samples coming and going and coming and going, some of them had to be legitimate. Is this just a thing where none of the samples have been real, or is there some cloak and dagger going on, or why is it so hard to get a hold? Because we're assuming that this creature is real and that it's been around for a long time. So why is it that all of our samples have turned out to be, kind of not what we were hoping for?
I believe it is because of the amateur and uneducated methodology that we're using.
Okay.
We know that when people go camping, they go poo in the woods, right?
Okay, yeah.
If somebody gave you a flashlight and a baggie and said, okay, go find me some people poop, how would you know?
Well, that's a great point.
Somebody said to me once, well, we've never had a Bigfoot body. How do you know he exists? And I said, well, I never saw the body of my great-grandfather either, but I know he existed.
Pretty sure about that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, the why isn't there a body, to me, is not a real argument.
Right. Especially, I just got back from Mammoth Cave in Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
and so much of that is still unexplored. And it would be so easy. I lived in West Virginia most of my life, and so much of the woods and the caves and just everything has no human contact. Certainly things live there that we don't know about.
Yes.
It would be naive to think that we are the only people who exist.
Well, the other thing too about this with respect to Bigfoot is that you if you go on the if you go on the idea that it is of the same nature as every other wilderness or forest creature like a bear, deer, mountain lion, what have you, uh, you might have a point. But what if Bigfoot is of a higher level intelligence than
Exactly.
these other animals, and that they have an intelligence that approaches ours,
Yep.
and it's not out there just kind of aimlessly rambling through the woods. It knows that humans are out there,
Hmm.
and you know, I think people have been on this continent for about 10,000 years, and so it's very familiar with people,
Hmm.
and it knows how to avoid people, and it's become aware of campers and hunters and cars and trucks and boats and what have
Teams
you.
of 25 people tromping through the woods.
Exactly. So when you say there's no body, so they don't exist, that's a very surface level argument,
Yes.
uh, and I think that the cumulative data built up over the years suggests that yes, this thing is real and it's out there.
Yep.
Um, and
Especially since we're getting reports from all over the world.
right, right, and I've often wondered. There's this real reluctance to say. It's almost like in that scene in The Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to this. Look at this over
Hmm.
here and not this over there.
Hmm.
There's this reluctance, and I think, especially with Bigfoot, because Bigfoot has all of these qualities or characteristics that suggest that it's a primate.
Hmm.
I think part of the reluctance here is because if you verify the existence of this creature, again, which is global, we have to have a whole nother conversation about human origins.
Absolutely.
And I think in a lot of quarters, people don't want to have that conversation.
Right. They're not. They haven't come this far yet.
Right. Yeah. So, the whole thing, and I dare say, and I'm kind of reaching here, but I think that if you verify Bigfoot, you really go a long way to solidify, I think, the theories of natural selection and a lot of Darwinism. And I think there's a real fear of, I don't know, making this argument go away.
Hmm.
Whether the world was made in 6 days and people are made out of dirt versus
Yep.
Darwinism. And I think that that argument kind of fades away as we piece together. Because what are the odds, if we verify Bigfoot, what are the odds, do you think, that we're going to find out that somehow we're related to it?
Oh, I think it's a very good possibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You see, so you fill in that gap in the evolutionary tree, if you will,
Yep. Yep.
and it's going to upset a lot of people, I think.
Well, and if Bigfoot is real, then so many other things could be as well.
Oh well, you remember the old analogy of, don't open the door
Right.
a little bit because somebody might kick it all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. I talked about this with another guest. If Bigfoot is real, well, what about chupacabra?
Hmm.
Or
Aliens.
what about aliens? And of course, you start talking about aliens, you really start talking about shaking up the world view.
Hmm.
And it's very strange in the 21st century that people still believe that the Earth is the center of the universe. It's crazy. Uh, so
Our universe isn't even the center.
it's not even exactly, the universe is not the center of whatever contains it, right?
Right.
So, but speaking of, if that's real, then what about the other thing? We have had conversations in the past about this unusual creature from your hometown, called Mothman. And I have to tell you, I read about Mothman for the first time when I was 7 or 8 years old. And it scared me to death because I read the story of the people being chased in the car,
Yes.
which I want you to tell the audience in a minute. And it was horrifying as a child, and I've been intrigued by the Mothman story ever since. I read the Mothman prophecies many years ago, John Keel, and it was one of the best books I've ever read, still to this day. And I am just so fascinated by this set of circumstances in this little place in the 60s. And so let's do some Mothman 101. You are from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, so set it up for us.
I was born in Point Pleasant only because there was no hospital in my town.
Uh-huh.
I'm actually originally from Ravenswood, which is about maybe half an hour up the Ohio River from Point Pleasant. Born in 61. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm old. And
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to verify that I didn't say that.
yeah, well, I've earned every gray hair, let me tell you. And I actually did not grow up knowing anything about Mothman.
Okay.
I knew about a bridge collapse.
Yes.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So it starts with what they call the Mothman flap, which is a series of events all kind of strung together. Started in the fall of 1966.
Okay.
There were some guys digging a grave, and they saw something weird, and they decided they weren't going to tell anybody about it because everybody would think they were nuts. And then about 2 weeks later, there were two couples out parking in an abandoned TNT production area from World War II.
Okay.
And, they were out there doing what young adults do.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw this black thing with wings and red eyes. And it scared them, of course.
Sure.
It's roughly 7 feet tall, so you can imagine. So they got in the car and they tried to drive away back towards Point Pleasant with the intent of alerting the authorities. And as they left the area, and the more they accelerated, this thing flew above their car the entire windy little river road.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a wingspan that covers 2 lanes. And it flew at 100 miles an hour, matching the speed of the car. And this is the 60s, so cars could really move back then.
Right. Yeah. Everything was souped up and
Right.
hot rods. Yeah.
And followed them all the way back to town without once flapping its wings.
See, that bothers me.
Yeah. And they, of course, went straight to the sheriff's department, and the sheriff knew the kids. They knew these young adults to be upstanding kids. They were not drunk. They were not stoned. They were good kids that were just having some quiet time. One of the things that happened was when the deputies went out there, they took plaster casts of talon marks in the ground. Those have not been relocated. Many of the old files from the courthouse have been found again. Mm-hmm. The casts have not yet been found. We haven't given up hope that they're in somebody's attic. But most people who research this won't even acknowledge that they were even taken. This event lasted for about 13 months.
Now wait a minute. Why is nobody wanting to talk about the casts?
For 2 reasons. First, they don't want to believe it was a physical creature.
Okay.
Physical creatures are a lot more intimidating than ghostly creatures.
Okay.
But also because nobody wants to believe that this thing exists.
Okay.
They either write it off as a misidentification, or they were drunk, or it's mass hysteria, or something. But we're talking about a town of 3,000 people, roughly.
Yeah, and 4 people don't constitute a mass.
Well, and they weren't the only ones that saw it, though.
Right,
I mean, adults, police officers, teachers, clergy.
Sure.
And not just in this one area, but all over town. Mm-hmm. There were other things happening as well. There were incidences of people having poltergeists in their homes. Mm-hmm. There was a great increase in reports of UFOs, but I have to clarify that. At that point in time, Point Pleasant was in the flight path for a airport in Huntington, West Virginia, and still is sometimes, but it was the basic flight path.
Okay.
It also has a long history dating back to prehistoric times of aerial phenomena. So it's a UFO corridor anyway.
Okay. Because
And
people will automatically try to conflate
right,
UFOs and Mothman. Okay.
they must be connected.
Right.
But also because they're hypervigilant right now, they're noticing things that
Right.
they didn't notice before. So I'm not comfortable saying that Mothman is directly connected to an increase of UFO sightings,
Right.
because those sightings have occurred before and since.
Okay.
A lot of people were having precognitive dreams,
Okay.
and these were people who were, God-fearing Baptists who
Right.
would never assume that they had any kind of power. And this went on for 13 months.
Mm.
It received national attention. It received police department investigation. It was treated with respect for the most part. And then they started calling in experts, and that's when it all went south.
Okay.
Somebody tried to explain what was going on, and the locals started to be a little insulted because the explanations were so ridiculous. So in December of 1967, 2 weeks before Christmas, the stoplights at both ends of the local bridge between Ohio and West Virginia malfunctioned.
Okay.
Both lights were red, making the bridge bumper to bumper full of cars.
Okay.
Okay? You couldn't get on the bridge, you couldn't get off the bridge. At that point, the stress of the relatively unknown way the bridge was built caused what they call an eye bar to break.
Yes.
And after that, they say Mothman was not seen again. So it was a natural thing for them to think that Mothman caused this bridge to fall. I have two problems with that.
Okay.
First of all, there have been many, many, many Mothman sightings since then.
Okay.
Second of all, they were less focused on Mothman because they had just lost 46 friends.
Absolutely.
Some of those bodies were never found.
Oh my goodness.
There were cars at the bottom of the river. It was horrific. It was a huge, personal, painful disaster. They're not going to worry about Mothman.
Right.
And, over time, they just didn't pay that close attention.
Now, was it true that at the time of the bridge collapse, that the bridge itself was not in optimum condition?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It was in serviceable condition, but they didn't have the rules back then that they have now.
Okay.
Largely because of this bridge collapse. They have redone a lot of the safety features, a lot of the safety inspections. They immediately dismantled a bridge made the same way up the river in St. Mary's, West Virginia, to prevent something like this happening, and they have completely changed the way bridges are made now.
Yes.
So in that respect, it probably has saved a lot of lives as well as cost some, but it was not a bad bridge. It had some issues, and for 1966-67, it was okay.
But it was not intended. So in other words, because of the malfunctioning stoplights,
Right.
and there were additional cars
Right.
on the bridge, adding to the stress.
Right. And it was a stress all the way across rather than a movement of stress. I'm not a physicist or anything like that, but bridges are constructed to handle moving objects.
Right.
So when they stop moving, the bridge doesn't know how to handle it.
All of that weight is just it's at a standstill.
Right.
And it's
Right.
just putting so much pressure on. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a tragedy, to be sure, but probably not something that you want to reasonably connect to the Mothman.
The only reasonable connection, and some people do make this connection, and I really can't fight it too adamantly, is that Mothman came to the area because it had some kind of foreknowledge.
Okay.
It was a harbinger.
Okay.
I can't fight that. I can't disprove that.
Well, that's yeah. That is the kind of esoteric idea that you can't prove or disprove.
Right. But I feel completely comfortable saying Mothman did not cause
Right.
that bridge to collapse.
Right.
And I can say that and still believe in Mothman.
Right. Right. And it's quite natural, like you said. You have the UFO activity, you have the poltergeist activity. Now, I also understand that, and now I have to admit, I'm pulling this from John Keel's book because he was there at a certain point.
Quite a lot, actually.
Right, he was there, kind of documenting whatever he could. But Men in Black
Hmm.
were reported there,
Still are.
and still are. Okay, and so you have this wide range of different kind of manifestations, of which we kind of use the term Mothman as kind of a catch-all to all of the weirdness
Hmm.
that was going on, and it does make one wonder, uh, if we can't connect these things. It's even stranger because what on earth was going on?
Well, there are many schools of thought, one of which is the ancient curse of Chief Cornstalk.
Oh yes.
Um, what they are probably thinking now is the first battle of the Revolution,
Hmm.
fought in Point Pleasant. And when Cornstalk came to them in friendship, they murdered him, and he uttered a curse on the land in his dying breath.
Mm,
And that's powerful stuff.
okay.
But you also need to know that Point Pleasant, West Virginia, sits in an area called the Rome Trough.
Okay.
The Rome Trough is an area that creates radon gas at a different level than most places and has an unusual gravitational effect.
Okay.
Um, so while it's not strong enough to cause hallucinations and that kind of stuff, it is different enough for science to have noted it.
Which means that there are possibilities that we might not have considered.
Exactly. There could be a completely perfectly normal scientific explanation for why these kinds of things happen in that place. And it doesn't matter whether the things that are happening are real or not. It could be connected to this scientific fact.
Hmm.
And that's quite a large area that starts in northern Kentucky and goes up through Point Pleasant. And nobody ever talks about it, and that's really frustrating because I think the more we apply science, the better understanding we're someday going to have.
Well, I was thinking about this book you're doing on xenoforensics, and it's very interesting to me because what you're doing with this book is actually addressing something that I've been talking about for a pretty good while, and it's the following thing. When you try to have a conversation with a quote a person in the mainstream sciences about things like this, Mothman and what have you, well, they're going to respond to you based on their training in the scientific method.
Yep.
I mean, that's only natural. And according to the scientific method, uh, these things don't exist because they're not reproducible on demand. They cannot be contained and controlled in a control group, or any of the processes that you carry out in a laboratory setting to study and examine something. So by the parameters that they understand, these things cannot be real.
Hmm.
Okay. I think what you're doing is a step toward expanding those parameters, because these things can be real, but they're just outside the box of
Right.
how the mainstream scientists look at reality.
Well, right now they're testing the idea of parallel universes with the Hadron Collider.
Right.
And I think that's opening so many minds. And I'm hoping that mainstream science will start to accept this out of the box thinking across the board.
Well, you of course remember a time when the idea of parallel dimensions was strictly a tool of science fiction,
Oh, yes.
and it was something that in almost every science fiction story or it was a main ingredient. It was a mainstay of science fiction writers. And now you have these physicists talking about this being probably a reality.
Hmm.
And if other dimensions exist, well, what's the next area of inquiry? Well, what populates these other dimensions?
Hmm.
Okay,
And what is their effect on us?
right. I mean, is there, as in science fiction, uh, are there cross-dimensional overlaps? Where things kind of, come and go,
Hmm.
or what have you. And when they do, we get a glimpse of them. They're there 1 minute and gone the next. That would explain a lot of things.
Well, I think one of the things that we forget in our arrogance is that people at one point believed the earth was flat.
Right.
They at one point believed that nothing could fly.
Correct.
And the more things that happened to make some people believe that those things were possible, and the more those people spoke out, the better the information became. And I think that we're going through that now in terms of what used to be thought of as occult or paranormal.
Hmm.
I think we're growing, and I'm so pleased. Unfortunately, we had to deal with a lot of reality television to get there, but at least the conversations are starting to go in the right direction.
Yeah, and that's let's talk about that for a minute because there's a proliferation, of course, on TV of these various types of programs covering various types of topics. And of course, some are better than others. Some are really engaging and interesting, and some are barely watchable. Uh, but it has served to bring these things into the arena of thought and conversation and debate. I watch some of these programs, and probably like you can watch something, and in about 10 minutes, I can't watch this anymore.
Yeah, I'm actually not allowed to watch them on the family TV because I tend to throw things,
Uh-huh.
and my husband doesn't want to replace the TV every week.
I don't blame him. And because what's happening is, of course, it's a television show,
Right.
and there's got to be this theatrical, over the top, sensationalized quality to it, or nobody will watch it, and it'll go off the air to get canceled.
One of the things that I lecture frequently on is reality TV, and I remind the audience that it stops being reality when there's a camera present.
Right.
That one act is enough to make it not be reality anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And the other thing too is that you know it's an industry now. The paranormal is an
Hmm.
industry. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. On the surface of it, it's kind of a new and emerging area of commerce. But you have to be aware that because of that, there are going to be things that are not quite what they seem.
Yes.
There's money to be made, right?
Yeah, those ghost meters ring a bell.
Well, yeah, and flashlights going on and off, uh, and things of this nature. And it's a television show, and if I'm on a show and I tell the ghost to turn off the flashlight, I need the flashlight to go off.
And I'm a plumber, so I know.
Well, exactly. Um, see, I can't imagine what show Robin is talking about.
Hey, I'm not afraid to name names.
I apparently not. But I think we all know, and what's funny is that now that show has been on for a long time.
Well, it's actually not even one of the worst ones.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's not one of the worst ones, but it's kind of like the baseline that
Hmm.
everything that's come after it. Um, but of course, we're talking about ghost hunters. Uh, Now, there's a show, and I hope I don't butcher the name. It's called paranormal witness.
Hmm.
Now, I thought that was okay.
It's tolerable.
Yeah, it's not, right. You don't hate it, right?
Right. Well, I don't. It doesn't make me angry.
Right. Because they're
There's
basically
no misrepresentation there.
right. They're
My
they're
big thing is that I want them to be truthful
right.
when about the stuff they don't find.
They're retelling these cases,
Right.
and they're reenacting these things, and it's fairly entertaining. Now, the other one is Monsters and Mysteries.
Yeah.
Monsters and Mysteries in America. That's it.
That's my guilty little pleasure.
Now, listen. There have been some. What do you think about that?
I think it's fun.
Hmm.
I don't take anything that's on TV very seriously.
Okay.
But I think that it is not intended to be a Nova show.
No.
You know, and I think that they don't try to be a Nova show.
No.
And that makes it tolerable for me.
So it's one of the ones that you don't throw things at that either. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. But now these other things, and of course we're not going to make any friends with this conversation here.
Oh, darling,
We're
you
not
ought to
gonna-
know by now there are no friends in the paranormal
We're
world.
not going to make it. But this the Finding Bigfoot. So I'm going to give our listeners a treat and let you do a little brief commentary on Finding Bigfoot.
Oh, where do I even start? First of all, they haven't found it.
No.
It ought to be called Looking for Bigfoot.
Looking for Bigfoot.
They spend an awful lot of money on this show that would have been better spent on real research.
Okay.
When you take a film crew and a bunch of TV actors into any set of woods, you're not going to get any animals.
That's true.
Even the squirrels aren't going to show up, let alone Bigfoot.
And when you take out the disco ball and the laser pointers and the stereo system, and you just turn the woods into a go-go, what do you think's going to happen?
Well, they might start breakdancing.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can think is a possibility. I had an interesting conversation with a very famous skeptic, Mr. Ben Radford.
All right.
And he had attended one of my lectures, at which point I was suggesting that you set up your equipment and then go back in the tent and watch.
Okay.
And he thought that was just horrible because you're not out in the field. And I said, okay, well, two things. First of all, if you're out there, it's not going to come out. And second of all, if you're out there and it kills you, you're never going to be able to tell your story.
Yeah, well, that's a great point.
And he hasn't bothered me since.
So now this man is a skeptic on Bigfoot or just on all of this stuff?
He is actually somebody that I very much respect. He is a true skeptic. A skeptic is not necessarily a debunker. Debunkers just don't believe.
Right.
James Randi is a debunker.
Right.
Ben Radford is a true skeptic in that he will at least listen with an educated ear and give the benefit of the doubt to anything that's reasonable.
It's interesting because there are Bigfoot advocates. I won't use the word believer, who come from mainstream science backgrounds.
Right.
I wonder what the difference is between them and their colleagues who are in the skeptic arena. What do you think? Like you have a guy like Jeff Meldrum, who's obviously a credentialed anthropologist, and other individuals like him. I wonder what is the line of delineation between those guys and their peers who think it's all nonsense.
Part of it is focus.
Okay.
Anthropologists and even archaeologists tend to be more willing to believe in the possibility than zoologists and biologists.
Okay.
It's just the nature of their study.
I see.
Some study things that are living, thriving, breathing. Others study things that have been established in the past. So I think that you're looking at a difference in focus. I also think that an individual's belief system comes into play without question. You are taught things growing up, and you learn to believe things through your experiences that you're never going to let go of. It's the same kind of thing that makes you Christian or Jewish or Muslim or
Right,
whatever.
right.
You find a thing that's comfortable and you stay with it. And I think that scientists are human in that way. They have a belief system. And I don't think we're ever going to change that. I think there's always going to be those people who are stuck in their belief system.
Well, but here's the thing. It's the way, if you look at how we've made scientific progress, all of our scientific progress is predicated on being wrong.
Not necessarily wrong, just not exclusively right.
Right. Well, in other words, so, you have a laser is not a new kind of light bulb. It's a different kind of physics.
Right.
So, yeah, you're right. Not necessarily wrong, but there's, and if you'd asked a physicist 100 years ago, right, about the feasibility of a laser, what would they tell you? That's not possible.
Yep.
That's not
Well,
possible.
and I think that even now, when you look at religion, there are so many different religions, but everybody still believes in God. Well, not everybody, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
All of the religions tend to gravitate to one supreme being,
Right.
and it is only the fringe that don't,
Right.
and they're the ones that get criticized.
That's yeah.
And I think this whole belief system is the same. I think that people get something in their head, and they want to go with it. And it's all a matter of, when you are researching anything, whether it's science or religion or sociology or whatever, you have to approach it with the tools that you have. And your belief system is one of those tools. The difference between a good researcher and a poor one is the willingness to say, you know what, I might be wrong.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And you see this back and forth with all of these subjects, whether it's UFOs, and the UFO. It's very interesting to me because you can take astronomers, or I guess they're called astrophysicists, or what have you, and it's interesting because most of them are very excited about the possibility of intelligent life out in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's out there. It's got to be out there. In fact, they'll say it's all over the place.
Yep.
But they don't want to talk to you about UFOs. And I spoke with a person who was affiliated with SETI in a conversation, and we had this talk, and I got down to this to this idea, and I said, listen, you think that there's intelligent life out in the universe? I do too. But if you're telling me that you are interested in finding intelligent life out in the universe, perhaps technologically advanced life out in the universe, and at the same time you have no interest in reviewing the UFO data, I don't think you're being serious.
That's right. They're out there. They're just not as smart as us.
Right.
Yeah, pretty arrogant stuff.
Yeah, I think I made that calculation. I don't think you're being serious. I think you're serious about SETI maintaining its funding. Because if aliens are coming here, or have come here, or will come here, you don't really need SETI, do you?
Yep.
And so I think a lot of that is what's going on too.
Yep.
We've got to all justify our existence,
And our job.
and our job, etc. So all of these things. So after the bridge collapses in Point Pleasant, the traditional thinking is that there's no more Mothman sightings, but you know that that's not true.
Correct.
Okay.
Even in Point Pleasant.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And this is, I evidenced this by a couple of things. First is my sighting, which was when I was in maybe kindergarten, first grade, must have been first or second grade. We were driving in the full daytime, and I saw what I processed at the time as being a man in a wetsuit. He was standing between the railroad track and a park and along the river, just standing there. And to me, he looked like he was, in a slick suit,
Yeah, like a
with
scuba diver.
right with big eye coverings and something folded up on his back, which in my mind were tanks.
Okay.
I didn't know anything about Mothman at this point. Even though the bridge had already collapsed, I was little. I didn't have any knowledge of that, and my family to this day doesn't talk about it. I'm kind of the black sheep of my family.
Now, okay. So let's. Okay, there's a lot of things we got to look at now.
Okay.
So let's say it's safe to think that what you saw there, standing between railroad tracks and a park, was not a guy in a wetsuit.
I can't find any logical reason for it to be a guy in a wetsuit.
Right. Okay. That's not so. So that means it was something strange.
Right.
Okay. Now I'm very curious and interested. And you said your family won't talk about it. Is it because it's troubling and upsetting, or they don't want to appear to be crazy?
I think it's both. My father still lives in the area, and my mother has a master's degree now and doesn't want to be perceived as crazy,
Right.
especially since she does therapy.
Of course.
So I think that the reason they don't talk about it is because it's not culturally, for the locals, something you talk about. It brings up bad memories. It brings up accusations of being crazy. I mean, it was a bad time.
Yeah.
And nobody really talks about it except during the Mothman Festival, and then it's different.
I guess Point Pleasant is kind of it's turned out to be like another like Roswell.
It's very strange. One weekend a year in September, there's this carnival atmosphere, and it's so fun. It is so fun. And as an academic, I was reluctant. I didn't want to go eat Mothman pancakes and buy blow up aliens.
Right.
And I do regularly go down and speak. Several of us do. And the first year was embarrassed by how much fun I had.
Right.
But I think it's important. I think it's important to understand that even in tragedy, something can come of it, and that we take ourselves way too seriously.
Right.
And the other thing that I want to mention is that those Mothman pancakes are to die for.
Well, there's an endorsement right there.
I had never had taco in a bag until the Mothman Festival.
Wow.
Yeah.
And again, and it's something, it kind of reinvigorates that community. It brings a few dollars into a small town,
Right.
Which
that needs it desperately.
Right. Otherwise, it would be, who's going to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, unless they're going through it.
Well,
Right.
even then, it's not on any major highways or anything, so there's no exit. So why would you go there?
Right. Some of the what I feel are some of the sillier claims about Mothman were, number one, that it was a crane,
Oh, don't you love that?
and then I guess it was an owl, but the crane, I just found that hard to believe. So where did this crane thing come from?
They called the experts at WVU, West Virginia University, and they said, "What is this thing?" And the people came down and hemmed and hawed and decided it was a sandhill crane.
All right.
Now, you can get sandhill cranes in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Doesn't happen real often, but it's not unknown for them to show up there. Not generally in November.
Okay.
But the biggest issue is that these things have a very long pointed beak and are only 4 feet tall at the most. This is not, and they're white, so this is not something that's ever going to be mistaken for Mothman.
Okay. And like you said, I would imagine that locals, I mean, they probably, even though the sandhill crane isn't a native of that area right there, those people have seen enough of that, right?
Right. And the same about the hawk. There was a red-shouldered hawk that's very, very natural to the area. And there is a really large wildlife preserve, so a lot of these things are around. But a red-shouldered hawk is red on its shoulders, not in its eyes.
Right. And the other thing too with this crane and this about talking about an owl. Listen, if you are like those two couples, those initial couples, if they're out at night, I can understand if you see a hawk or an owl, swooping down. It it might startle you for a
Hmm.
moment until you kind of calibrate and say, "Oh, okay, that's a hawk, whatever."
And it's not bigger than I am.
Right. I can't imagine a circumstance where if that's what they saw, they jumped in the car screaming down the highway, bloody murder.
Right. Because culturally, this is a place that culturally takes a week off for Thanksgiving to go deer hunting.
Right.
So, these are not people who are unfamiliar with wildlife.
Right. And so no, those people, based on their reaction, saw something that scared the daylights out of them. And it wasn't a crane and it wasn't a hawk.
Right. And they saw it for 13 months.
That's that's a pretty good long while. Um, there was one thing I read, and I think you mentioned it earlier, that really bothers me about Mothman. It's that it was witnessed standing on the ground
Hmm.
and going up into the air without flapping.
Right. And no engine sounds.
Right. Now, if you take into account that this thing is, I just say it's man size, 7 feet tall, but it's roughly
Charles Barkley size.
exactly okay. It's the size of a very large man. According to all of the physics and laws of aerodynamics that I understand,
Hmm.
that shouldn't be able to. That's not possible.
And that's the biggest argument for it being something otherworldly.
Okay.
There is nothing in nature that can do that,
Right.
that we know of.
Right.
And that's the big thing that makes people say, no, it's not a cryptozoological study. It's alien, or it's, some kind of occult thing.
But it has. But then it has wings. It has wings. So one would imagine that those wings serve a purpose.
Right.
But when it's taking off, it's not flapping its wings. When it's chasing this car down the highway, it's not flapping its wings. How do you keep up with a car that's going 100 miles an hour and it's not flapping?
Yep.
That's very frightening, because to me it does suggest that this is something other than just some kind of weird animal we don't know about.
Except when you take in the Bigfoot theories that Bigfoot has extra kinds of abilities
Okay.
that are superhuman. If Bigfoot can read our minds and avoid us, is it not possible for Mothman to be able to fly in a non-traditional way?
Well, sure. Sure. I mean, it's anomalous. It's possible, but whatever that explanation is, it's anomalous.
Yes, yes.
You know,
It is a stretch of some kind.
yeah, yeah. And like you mentioned, Bigfoot. I think a lot rests on how intelligent it is.
Yes.
I don't think that it's comparable to a gorilla.
Well, I think the precognition stuff comes into play with this as well. Some of the places that Mothman has been reported have been disasters.
Okay.
Chernobyl, the 9/11 stuff has Mothman related stuff. The bridge that fell in Minnesota,
Hmm.
was it Minnesota?
Yeah.
Has a Mothman story associated with it. And instead of it being something that causes these horrific events, why couldn't it be something with a superhuman ability to know that it's coming and be there?
Yeah. That's a viable explanation.
It's certainly as viable as it makes it happen.
Right. Yeah, because when you look at the cause of these things, usually you can put your finger on a cause.
Right, right.
That
Some
makes
kind of sense-making
that
cause.
makes sense, right? And all of those cases, we can say, well, this is what caused it. And I think there's probably a historical or maybe a folkloric tradition of these kind of harbingers of doom.
Yes.
Uh,
Especially related to bird-like objects.
right, right. So it's But then, it gets back down to the question, what is it? What is Mothman? What is it? Is it something is it something that Chief Cornstalk conjured up? Is it something uh, is it something alien? Is it something that just pops in and out of some weird parallel reality? Uh,
Well,
but
and
it
the really scary question
mhm.
is there only one?
It would be very scary if there was, because it's all over the place.
Right. But it's even scarier if there's a breeding population, because then there's got to be at least 500 of these things.
What was the story that came from England that they call the Owl Man? And that seemed very similar to Mothman.
It was. It was. I don't really know all the details. I know it was yet another big, scary, red-eyed bird.
Yeah,
Um,
but
and of course, you have things like phoenixes and thunderbirds, and
yeah,
in the Orient, flying humans are a big story. Hindu cultures have bird people.
hmm
There are lots and lots of cave markings that show, you know, humans that fly. So, this is by no means a new phenomenon.
there's a very uh, there's a very entertaining uh, 1970s B movie,
Oh, I love my 1970s B movies.
Gargoyles. I
Ooh,
think it had Cornell Wilde
oh, love it.
and Bernie Casey. And if you watch that movie, uh, it makes you think of these type of things, these kind of flying humanoid, these gargoyle type
Hmm.
flying creatures. I mean, even though it's obviously in the form of a fantasy film, in this film in particular, no, it's an isolated town out in the middle of nowhere, and these things are flapping all over the place, terrorizing people. And of course, nobody believes it at first. You start talking about gargoyles, it sounds ridiculous. Except, in the story, of course, they're real. Um, and there's this whole thing. We have this long tradition, you're right, of these flying, quasi humanoid.
Angels.
Exactly. Uh, every a lot of these ancient cultures, I know, like in Mesopotamia, I know the Aztecs, they all have these winged
Hmm.
anthropomorphic beings, and it makes one wonder if there isn't something real behind it. In our modern day and age, we look at Mothman and we look at Thunderbird and we look at Chupacabra. Oh, I was going to ask you about. I had a Chupacabra question,
Okay.
because okay. I'm sure that you remember back in the 90s when we first started hearing about Chupacabra, mostly coming out of Puerto Rico.
Hmm.
All right, and it was described as this kind of gargoyle type creature,
Spiny, ridgy.
spiny,
Yep.
ridgy, kind of semi reptilian with a forked tongue, and it hops
Yep.
like a kangaroo, and it had wings.
Yep.
And
How they got from that to a mangy coyote,
that's
I
my
do not
was
know.
my question, because uh, I looked around and I started seeing things about chupacabra, and all of a sudden it's like a mangy dingo.
Hmm.
And I thought to myself, I know what's happened here.
Hollywood.
The media, yeah,
Yep.
media, and somehow they just commandeered and co-opted this.
Well, look what Ghostbusters did to ectoplasm. Ectoplasm doesn't come out of the wall; it comes out of the medium.
Right,
And I think it's the same kind of thing with the chupa. They've made it bigger than life, and now it has lost all semblance to the real story.
right. And so you have these, obviously, whatever these little canine things are, it's some kind of it's some kind of weird thing
Hmm.
that's real, because I know they've killed some.
Hmm.
So those things are real, but those things are not chupacabra.
Right.
But that's an example of how crazy things can get when these issues and when these topics get caught up in the swirl of the media and Hollywood.
And people's need to be in the spotlight.
Oh, is that what you're not suggesting that people will do things to get a camera on them
You
and
think?
to get some publicity? That's an
No,
outrageous
certainly
accusation.
nobody with a doctorate degree and some experience in DNA would ever do something like that.
No, that's outrageous.
Yeah,
Uh,
but truly, it is the common people that get caught up in this. They see the reality people as normal, and just like them,
mhm.
and then they think, well, if he can do that, I can do that. Oh, look, there's a dead dog. Oh my gosh, maybe it's a chupacabra.
Well, now okay. Now see, you've done a lot of media.
I've done way too much media.
Okay, so now you tell me if this isn't true or not. Okay. Uh, how many people that are in and around paranormal research, I don't care what it is, how many of them want a TV show?
Want one?
Yes.
Everyone.
Okay. All right. Because I've had the same experience.
Many people get into this business simply to get a TV show.
Exactly. I've had conversations with many people, and somewhere, well, I was thinking about doing a show, or so and so said they want to do a show, and this. I've had more people talk to me about shows
Hmm.
that have never seen the light of day, okay, and are not going to, and so that's become another kind of element to this whole thing. We've all we all understand now that if the possibility exists for the cameras to be on me, that kind of
Well,
thing.
and my problem with that is people think that reality TV stars make money.
No,
They don't make money.
no.
Even the Ryan Buells of the world don't make money.
Yeah, I think and I may be wrong here. I mean, I think the plumbers make money,
It's not a huge amount.
but I don't mean the plumbers' assistants.
Oh,
No, I know but I think the plumbers are doing okay. But you're right. By and large, it's not a lucrative.
and largely because they don't have to hire union actors
Right.
because it's technically not fiction. So your writers don't have to be union. You can pay them less than scale.
Hmm.
And it's really rather sad. It's basically just TV slavery.
Yeah, yeah. But there's a lot of people who, you know, the idea of saying I'm on TV.
Hmm.
And of course, there's a kind of naive or naivete where, hey, if I can just get on TV, who knows? There's a lot of things that can open up, and I can be a star. I mean,
Hope he discovered.
exactly that kind of thing. So that's something that's going on. Uh,
It's
in,
so sad too because it has ruined so many lives and so many relationships because you start believing your own stuff
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and you just lose yourself in this business and it's unfortunate. You start even I'm going to drop names again.
Okay.
Ryan Buell, I adored when he was growing up.
Paranormal State, right?
Yes,
Hmm.
he was a legitimate researcher.
Okay.
He was a smart kid
Okay.
with some great ideas, and then Hollywood got a hold of him.
And did he change? I don't know his story.
He very much changed because there was a pressure to produce
Hmm.
and to always be better than the last thing that he did,
Hmm.
to the point where it started to all be fake, and then there were personalities involved, and then fraud got involved, and it just spiraled out of control. And the stories that are still going around about that particular group, it's just so sad.
Hmm.
And if he had been left to his own devices to stay at his college level group
Hmm.
and just do research, I think we could have had wonderful things come out of him. But instead, he's better known now for coming out of the closet as gay, marrying his best friend, and
Hmm.
charging a lot for seminars that were never put on, and all of this other gossip magazine stuff.
So that's really what it's just reduced to, that kind of stuff.
It is, and it's happening all the time.
Hmm.
I shudder to think what Long Island Medium's life is going to be like in 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. I've seen that, and I said, this has the makings of a tabloid level uh, nightmare.
Well, and it's also why I'm really careful about who I associate with.
Hmm.
I have 2 adult daughters and a teenage son,
Okay.
and I don't ever want them to be in a position where somebody randomly walks up to them and says, I saw your mom on TV. She's a nut.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Right.
the
Yeah.
the other side of that is you so lose your anonymity. I have been in Walmart and had people walk up to me and say, "I have a ghost in my house. Will you come over?" And I'm like,
No.
"Excuse me, who
Yeah.
are you?"
Yeah. 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 And but that happens the minute you're right. I mean, but the minute you're on the internet, you're doing media, you're doing interviews, you're doing uh, people. I mean, I've had people say things to me or say things around me or of me, and uh, I didn't know who they were talking about,
Hmm.
right? And that's just it's the nature of it, and uh, and the other thing too, on the other side of the coin, you have some notoriety. If you have any degree of notoriety, there are absolutely going to be people who are going to dislike you.
Oh, absolutely.
Not because they know you and dislike you, but because you have notoriety.
Yep.
Okay? And they will assume a negative feeling about you because you have notoriety, so there must be something about you that is, slimy.
Well, you're like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. You can convince anybody to follow you.
Right, right. So I wanted to ask you, you've got this haunt cuisine, and you've got this now. Is xenoforensics out, or are you working on it?
It is not out. I have
Uh,
actually been working on it now. I'm into my third year
mhm.
because technology is changing so fast that I'm having to update.
Oh,
I've made a firm commitment to have it out this fall because the best I can do moving forward is to just do new versions
right.
rather than to keep trying to keep up with it because it'll never be done that way. And this is information I think needs to be in the hands of the regular person, and it will be available as an ebook and all that kind of stuff too, very inexpensive. So it's a book for regular ghost people, ghost hunters, not for academics.
Well, see, you need to try to time it to get it out by Halloween.
Oh, that makes me crazy.
I know, but that's just it's cliched, and it's overdone.
Yeah, my publicist is already fielding inquiries.
Right,
Can we have her on TV for Halloween?
right. So but see, that's part of this whole thing. If you're in any of these areas of research, okay, uh, it's generally looked upon as Halloween is our Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, that
Black Friday really is Black Friday.
exactly. Now, the haunt cuisine is out now. So, is that something they can get on Amazon, or is
It
there?
is. It's on Amazon. It's only $8.
Okay,
It's a fun book. I'm actually hoping, and you're going to think that I've sold out, but
okay,
bear with me for a minute.
okay.
I'm actually hoping that the Food Network will pick that up as a series
Oh yeah, well why not?
because it merges that whole paranormal stuff with
Right.
actual food preparation.
All of these networks want paranormal programming.
Right, right. And
So
these are real stories. These aren't like fictional recreations. One of the things in the book is that there are 3 Pizza Huts in the U.S. who have haunting events associated with them.
yeah.
And that is paired with a recipe for homemade pizza.
See, I would watch that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would too.
I would watch that because I think that's interesting, and homemade pizza. I'm going to watch that anyway, right?
But one of the other ones is the history of an author from West Virginia by the last name of Pancake and how he haunts his childhood home. And guess what's paired with that?
I can't guess.
Homemade pancakes.
Oh, see, the surprises for everybody.
Now, see, I didn't know you could make homemade pancakes. I thought you had to make it with Bisquick.
That's right. That's right.
Apparently, you can use real flour.
back in the days, before color television.
Right.
Oh, don't you love talking to somebody who's like 22 and they say,
Oh,
wait a minute, wait. Are you saying that at one point that none of the TV shows were in color?
yep.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
Yeah.
and I get to talk about before we had a TV.
See, now to me that's over the line. I never had that experience.
My cousin's home was one of the first places that tested cable television.
Really?
and it was because she was in Columbus, Ohio, and they were doing a lot of that technical stuff up
Mm.
there, and I was fascinated. Of course, you still had to stand up and walk across the room and change the cable box,
Right,
but
right.
you know, it was just amazing to me that you could have more than three channels.
Well, I remember getting cable in our home, and it sounds so quaint and silly now, but I remember the Disney Channel was showing H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, the 1960
Oh,
version with, Rod Taylor and Yvette Mimieux. Remember that one?
oh yeah.
And down at the bottom of the screen, they scrolled across. This movie will be shown in its entirety without commercial interruption. I was like, what? I'm getting ready to sit here and watch this all the way through.
Yep. It also changed childhoods, I think, because we didn't realize how intense things were watching them straight through. Wizard of Oz can be a very intense movie.
Yeah, just straight through, yeah.
Right. And, if you're not used to getting up and taking a stretch every 20 minutes, it can really be overwhelming for a 7 or 8 year old.
Yeah, so yeah, the whole idea of watching a movie without commercials, which is like what you get at the theater, but you get that
Mhm.
at home. And you and so yeah, it is a whole new different experience. Now
Mhm.
you also had Haunted Hospitality, which is now that is the Low Hotel, right? Tell us about that.
The Low Hotel was started in 1901, virtually on the battlegrounds of the Chief Cornstalk murders, and is still a thriving hotel. Very, very haunted.
Okay.
And what we were able to do through the generosity of the people at the Low and the help of the West Virginia Culture Association and the archives was to document who those hauntings were in life.
Okay.
We've got names
Mm.
based on the behavioral profiles and the things that the ghosts do and say. We were able to find out who these people most likely were.
And you could compare that to the historical
Right.
records.
And we were able to do that for the most part because the hotels only had like three owners ever.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And in two of those cases, the families lived at the hotel.
Right.
So the hauntings involved family members.
So now this book is out too, also that people
It
can
is,
pick
and
up.
it's also $8. It is a very small book with a
Okay.
lot of information.
Okay. So people now that's what you need to do. You just go to Amazon
Hmm.
and you Haunted Hospitality, Haunt
Or just put in
Cuisine,
Robin Bellamy.
Robin Bellamy. Just type it in; it'll come up. I don't want anybody emailing me saying that, oh, I can't find it. No, go to Amazon and type in Robin Bellamy's name, and these books will come up. And now I have to go back and plug. If you haven't read the Mothman Prophecies, pick that book up.
Oh, it's a wonderful book.
Please pick
And
that book up.
watch the movie as entertainment, but read the
Or
book as education.
or don't watch the movie.
Or don't watch the movie.
That's our show's official position is don't watch it. Even though I like Laura Linney,
Yep.
don't. It's just it's an unfortunate rendition. If you read the book, you'll laugh all the way through the movie.
Well, see, I almost got asked to leave the movie theater when I saw it the first time
Yeah.
because when they showed the sheriff as female, it just cracked me up.
Yeah,
And the sheriff of Point Pleasant was this
city.
lovely little middle-aged man.
Yeah, I don't know what that was one of those kind of
Artistic liberties.
political correctness, artistic. Yeah, well, let's make her a woman.
Yeah.
Show the sensitive side of law enforcement, that kind of thing.
Yep.
But yeah, it's not a good movie. But the Mothman Prophecies by John Keel, the late John Keel, is a remarkable read, and it'll.
And it's not just about Mothman. It also
No,
talks about the
no.
alien stuff and
There's a lot of weird things going on. Like I said, there'll be stories in there about poltergeist, UFO activity, other strange creature sightings, Men in Black, all kinds of things. It's a fantastic book. And if you have enjoyed our conversation tonight, I know you will run right out and pick that book up, as well as Robin's other books. Robin, if you wouldn't mind hanging on a few minutes after we go off the air so I could have a little post-show footnote with you. Uh, This has been the Shadowland Radio Show. My special guest tonight has been Robin Bellamy. And we focus on Mothman, but as you notice, we've been all over the map, which is what we tend to do when it's fun. But that's all for this show, and I promise that I will see you again on the flip side.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
Welcome to the Shadowland Radio Show. I'm Dr. William Lester, your host, and I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd like to thank all those people who have subscribed to our program on our YouTube channel at Blackwater Media. The show can also be heard on Google Plus and on our Facebook page. You can also listen at www.shadowlandradioshow.com. Enjoy the program. American miners underwent a harrowing ordeal in 8 Canyon on the east side of Mount St. Helens in the state of Washington. In 1924, Fred Beck and several fellow prospectors noticed huge footprints around their cabin from time to time and were puzzled by them. Then, one day they saw a large ape-like creature watching them from behind a tree. One miner fired at it and the thing ran off, apparently wounded in the head. Next, Fred Beck spotted another such creature standing by the edge of the canyon wall and shot it in the back. It fell off the cliff and was lost to view. That night, at least 2 creatures attacked the cabin, battering at the roof and walls in an attempt to break in. A strip of wood was gouged out from between 2 logs of the cabin, and the men inside heard thumps on the roof that sounded like the blows of large rocks. But the cabin was sturdily built to withstand heavy snowfalls and windowless, and with the door braced from the inside, the creatures were unable to force their way in. Neither were they frightened off by the gunshots. About 5 hours later, when dawn was approaching, the frustrated callers went away, leaving a muddle of big footprints around the cabin. The miners also left, abandoning both their cabin and their mine. A creature of this type was to become known in the United States and Canada as Bigfoot or Sasquatch. The imprint of a leather shoe was found in Triassic limestone in Fisher Canyon, Pershing County, Nevada in 1927 by Alfred E. Knapp. According to microphotographs of the print, the leather was hand-stitched with a finer thread than was customarily used by shoemakers in 1927. Triassic limestone is conventionally dated as between 180 and 225 million years old. A strange disc-shaped object was photographed by Paul Trent on May 11, 1950 in the state of Oregon. The two photographs are of great importance in ufology because of their clarity and because of the amount of research undertaken to establish their credibility. The present consensus is that an extraordinary object of the kind described here did indeed fly within the view of Mr. and Mrs. Paul Trent. What the Trents observed on their farm in the township of McMinnville, Oregon, was a strange thing, like a very large lid of a dustbin with a sort of spur on top. Mr. Trent said the flying object was shining like burnished silver, was noiseless, and gave off no smoke or vapor. After a few minutes, it went off to the northwest and vanished over the skyline. He saw it in the evening and estimated it to have been about 30 feet in diameter. When it first came into view, it was flying slowly, but did not seem to be rotating. In 1828, a British ship out of Liverpool, England, was headed due west towards Nova Scotia in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The ship had been at sea for many weeks when one day the first mate, Robert Bruce, found a strange man writing on a blackboard in the captain's cabin. Bruce was astonished to discover someone he did not recognize on board and, mystified, went to report the event to the captain. The captain was incredulous. How could there be anyone on the ship who neither he nor the mate had seen before? Nonetheless, he followed Bruce to the cabin and looked at the blackboard. Plain to see were the words, "Steer to the northwest." The stranger, however, had disappeared. The captain asked everyone on the ship to write the same words on a slate, but nobody's handwriting matched that on the blackboard. The captain was now altogether at a loss to explain the apparition and its message, but he ordered the ship's course changed to the northwest. Some hours later, the ship's lookout sighted another vessel stuck fast in the ice. All her passengers were taken aboard, and among them, Bruce recognized the man he had seen in the cabin. The captain then asked him to write down the words, "Steer to the northwest." His handwriting matched that of the original message exactly. According to the captain of the icebound vessel, the passenger concerned had fallen asleep at about the same time that his double was seen. When he awoke, he had announced with complete certainty that they would all be saved. In relating to vampires, there are many myths woven as to their true powers. The following information will serve you well. Never forget that in reality, vampires are pathetic creatures, though dangerous. Vain and arrogant, they fear disfigurement, but above all, they fear the death that will end their eternal life and send them to an eternity of pain and torment. Vampires are adept at controlling the human mind, hypnotizing, charming, and terrifying their prey, confusing even a skilled researcher. They may create illusion to inspire abject terror or make themselves appear so attractive and charismatic that humans are lost in passion. The most powerful are known to fog the mind so that they can seem to vanish or disperse as mist. It is true that any vampire is imbued with demonic strength and speed. They heal quickly, and the more powerful may fight on with a wound that would be mortal to a human. Their hearing is extraordinary, and their eyesight sharper than a hawk's. Be assured, though, that vampires have limits that they have been careful to obscure, and their immortality can be turned against them. Although fast to heal, a serious wound will scar and hinder a vampire for all eternity. Consequently, they are cautious of their person in battle, and particularly protective of their appearance, especially their face. It is an excellent place for those battling the vampire to strike. Vampires are arrogant of their power, reliant on the terror they inspire, and fearful for their twisted lives. Your steadfast courage will strike fear deep into their corrupt souls. No matter how poised and confident it seems, the vampire that you face calmly and with a stout heart will see in you its doom. In attack, the vampire's instinct will be to drain its prey of blood. Their teeth are hard as diamonds and contain hollow chambers that allow it to suck blood directly into the back of its throat. In combat and destruction of the vampire, removal of the head is a certain death blow. Striking at the eyes to blind your foe will cause mental and physical anguish. The ear provides an entrance for a blow to the brain. If you fail, then rendering a vampire deaf will eliminate one of its greatest advantages. To smash the vampire's teeth is to rob it of its best and most precious weapon. A blow to the heart with a stake is certain death. Breaking the spine is an excellent way to put the vampire at your mercy, although it would eventually heal if unmolested. While most of the vampire's digestive organs are redundant remnants of its humanity, its stomach is adapted to carry the blood of its prey directly into its own veins. A strike here will not kill, but will cause extreme discomfort and prevent feeding until healing is complete. Ruined hamstrings and knees will prevent escape and allow the hunter to kill at leisure. This is an excellent target if the hunter is springing an ambush from a low hiding place. Once a vampire has been destroyed, great care should be taken with the disposal of its corpse. While decapitation or a stake through the heart will prevent any chance of recovery, the vampire corpse is precious to other vampires. Whenever possible, the corpse should be committed to fire, and the hunter should watch that it is completely consumed by flames before departing. Mind these words and remember them well, for one day they may serve you, if perchance you happen to encounter a night stalker. A demonic haunting is when a negative, non-human spirit or spirits haunt a location. Demons destroy families and can haunt people their entire lives. These types of hauntings usually start out playful but can quickly turn very dangerous and even deadly. Even if you move, the demons will follow. An exorcism or cleansing must be conducted to rid the victim, object, or location of these negative entities by a demonologist, priest, or shaman, but there is no guarantee that this will work. Demons are negative, non-human spirits, commonly used in Judeo-Christian terms as fallen angels. The term also applies to many different gods and spirits in other cultures that predate Judeo-Christian ones. It is believed that there is a hierarchy with demons as well, ranging from the very powerful to lesser ones. Demons are very deceptive about concealing their true identity, often disguising themselves as harmless spirits or ghosts. A demon can appear as many entities to confuse its targets and to extract more fear energy out of victims by making their numbers seem greater. However, they usually attack in waves, starting with lesser demons leading the way. Once the victim has been morally broken down over time, the more powerful demons step in for the possession. It is important to obtain the demon's name, as this will help the exorcist or shaman in the exorcism or cleansing. Foul smells like rotting garbage and sulfur are telltale signs of a demonic presence. The sounds of animals grunting are associated as well, and their appearance can range from a dark shadow form, human-like form, to horned, half-animal-like creatures. Never taunt or challenge a demon unless properly trained, as this usually increases the violence at a haunted location. Demons are evil, inhuman, supernatural beings of intelligence, wit, and power. They have the ability to invade our homes, attach themselves to objects and humans, and cause both mental and emotional torture by attacking or possessing humans. They can morph into any shape they wish, from humans to animals before your eyes. They are neither male nor female, but will change to whatever meets the need at the time. Demons are most commonly seen as black masses standing in doorways or in corners of the room. They have a hatred for mankind and think us as lowly and stupid. Most demonic entities like a challenge and are incredibly conniving. They may have you believing they are good spirits, or may appear to have gone away, only to confront you again at the least expected and most vulnerable moment. Their main goal is to break down a person's free will in order to make way for possession, beginning as oppression. This can take days, months, or even years, but time is of no concern to them, and they do not give up easily. Demonic hauntings usually start in a subtle way. Faucets dripping, scratches in the walls, thumping sounds, knocking. These behaviors typically share the characteristics of a poltergeist haunting, but will become more extreme. As the seriousness progresses, your blankets may be pulled off the bed, things fall off the walls, perhaps the bed shakes violently. Maybe you begin hearing growling sounds. Why is it doing this? Because it wants you to know it's in control and wants you to fear it. They feed off of this energy, and it can be taxing if you are off guard. The fear is what the demon needs, so the more you fear it, the stronger it becomes. Once they succeed in creating an atmosphere of fear, they start to exaggerate their powers. Then the personal attacks begin. Scratches on the skin, pushing, shoving, and hitting. One mark often associated with a demon attack is a scratch of 3 lines, which is believed to be the sign of mocking the Trinity. The air in the affected area will feel thick, like fog, and the temperature will drastically change, usually becoming warmer, which is the opposite from a human entity attempting to manifest, although decreasing temperatures have been noted with demonic hauntings as well. It's common for several entities to exist in one location with a strong evil presence seemingly controlling the others and not allowing them to cross over. These demons come into our world through a gateway, and it's often either a cave, a well, or natural hole in the earth, and normally not more than 10 or 20 feet away from a haunting. Places that are believed to have crossing ley lines also act as a magnet or portal for demons, as well as other entities. Another way for them to enter is through a door, usually opened up by using a Ouija board or delving into some form of black magic, witchcraft, or demonic worship that a person shouldn't be meddling in. In this case, the person most likely doesn't know what they've gotten themselves into unless it's done deliberately. It's always a safe bet to stay away from these temptations. Yes, that includes Ouija boards that seem harmless. A demonic haunting requires immediate action. The longer it's allowed to remain, the stronger it becomes. You'll need to seek help from an experienced paranormal group, researcher, demonologist, or even a local church. In most cases, it will usually take an exorcism by an ordained priest to rid your home of the demon. There are, however, other methods that may work. It is believed that you can possess the ability to drive a demon away on your own. You will have to gather the strength within yourself and command it to leave. Yes, command. Don't taunt, don't confront, don't get angry, and most of all, do not show fear. It is believed that it's like a code of conduct with them. Sometimes they will leave, not right away, but with persistence and with no fear. Also, it's been said the demons don't like to be ignored. If it can't get you to fear it, then the game is over. Like they say, ignore it and it will go away, unless it is determined to attach itself to a person. Something else that might help is smudging. To smudge your house, open the windows and light a bundle of dried sage or smudging sticks, available at most health and metaphysical stores. Sage is believed to clear away negative energy and spirits. Catch the ashes with a plate held underneath the bundle and walk around your home to cleanse it with the sage smoke. Make sure that the smoke covers every part of the home, especially corners, closets, basements, and attics. It is also said that sprinkling holy water throughout the house might work too, although this is not always successful if not done by a priest. All Catholic churches will have holy water available, as well as many other churches. When obtaining holy water, it is customary to leave a small donation if possible. You will also need to recite a prayer when smudging or using holy water. There's one thing that you should understand. These methods will not always work. If you truly suspect a demonic haunting, I highly suggest that you do not use any method in any attempt to rid it yourself. A very common belief is that if you hold up a cross or splash holy water around, the demon will not harm you and leave right away. There's not 1 ounce of truth in this. Yes, these may help in an emergency situation, but it's more likely that it will just anger the entity. Again, this is better left for a priest or qualified demonologist when faced with a plague of demons. I'd like to thank you for listening to this edition of the Shadowland Radio Show and remind you that you can listen to the show on our YouTube channel at Blackwater Media. You can also listen on Facebook, Google+, and at shadowlandradioshow.com. I don't want you to panic or freak out or flip out or lose your mind for any reason, because I promise that I will see each and every one of you again on the flip side